Exodus. This morning we come to the fourth chapter, and you'll recall from the previous chapter, God has appeared to Moses in a burning bush, and Moses has begun the dialogue with him. Well, let's see how it's going. Chapter 4. Moses answered, "What if they do not believe me, or listen to me, or say, 'The Lord did not appear to you'?" Then the Lord said to him, "What is that in your hand?" A staff, he replied. The Lord said, "Throw it on the ground." Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake, and he ran from it. Then the Lord said to him, "Reach out your hand and take it by the tail." So Moses reached out and took hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. "This," said the Lord, "is so they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has appeared to you." Then the Lord said, "Put your hand inside your cloak." So Moses put his hand into his cloak, and when he took it out, the skin was leprous and had become white as snow. "Now put it back in your cloak," he said. So Moses put his hand back in his cloak. When he took it out, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. Then the Lord said, "If they do not believe you or pay attention to the first sign, they may believe the second. But if they do not believe these two signs or listen to you, take some water from the Nile and pour it on the ground. The water you take from the river will become blood on the dry ground." Moses said to the Lord, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I've never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you've spoken to your servant. I'm slow of speech, slow of tongue." The Lord said to him, "Who gave human beings their mouths? Who made them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak. I will teach you what to say." But Moses said, "Pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else." Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, "What about your brother Aaron, the Levite? I know he can speak well. He's already on his way to meet you. He will be glad to see you. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I will help both of you speak and will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if he were your mouth and as if you were God to him. But take this staff in your hand, that you can perform the signs with it." The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. It's called glossophobia, and it is one of the most common of all fears, creating anxiety and real health concerns for countless otherwise competent and confident people. According to the Mayo Clinic, its symptoms can range from slight nervousness to downright paralyzing panic. It manifests itself in other ways as well: performance anxiety, stage fright, test anxiety, writer's block. But it's the fear of actual public speaking that is the most prevalent form of this behavior. Causes many to go out of their way to avoid any circumstance that might require it. Now, I want to be clear, this is not just an emotional response. There are physiological reasons for why some people are terrified at the thought of getting up and talking. When I was growing up in school, my own dysnomia made even just reading in class a frightening experience. I did what some of you may have done if you've had this. You counted ahead. You were reading sentences. You counted how many sentences are up there, how many people are ahead of me. What sentence is going to be my sentence? Can I say it? Can I do it? Whether it's etiology is physical or purely mental. The fear of speaking can be disabling. So maybe that's what was going on with Moses, our prince of Egypt in exile, when God called him to take a rather public role in the life of his people indeed. Maybe that's why, as we said last Sunday, looking at chapter 3, that Moses responded to the miracle of the burning bush by asking two really understandable questions, namely, but who am I that I should go to Pharaoh, get the Israelites out of Egypt? And secondly, suppose I go to the Israelites and they say, who sent you? What is his name? How shall I answer them? As we saw, however, God was fairly quick to reply to both of those concerns. He told Moses that it really didn't matter who Moses was. What matters is, God said, is who I am. Just precisely the name God then gave to Moses to share with others. Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. YHWH in the Hebrew consonants. I am who I am. I shall be who I shall be. But apparently, those answers were not quite enough to convince Moses. And so, in the conversation that followed, God gave that to that aging shepherd, who the Bible says was already 80 years old, 3 signs he could perform, not so much to convince Pharaoh as to convince the Israelites, and really to convince Moses himself, I think. To that quintessential question of, what if? You know, the one that keeps us from doing lots of things. What if? A hypothetical particle can also translate on the lines of, but look. What if the Israelites do not believe me? Or they don't listen to me, or they say, the Lord didn't appear to you. God asked Moses a question of his own in return, though. What's in your hand? And this is clearly a rhetorical device, wasn't it? Because God knew exactly what was in Moses' hand. It was something which was pretty much always there. As a shepherd, there was one piece of equipment that was irreplaceable, a mateh, a staff or a rod. First of all, on rocky ground, the staff was like a hiking stick to keep you stable and even catch you if you started to fall. Secondly, the staff was used for guiding sheep through a new gate or along a dangerous or difficult route. It's something which the Sinai wilderness was full of. You pressed it gently against the side of the animal to kind of push him into the way he should go. And third, of course, the staff could be an offensive weapon if a predator, a wild animal, some of the threat came against the sheep. So again, a shepherd was never without his staff. But you see, God called Moses' attention to his staff because God had a particular purpose for it, an extraordinary purpose for a very ordinary object. He used it a bit like an audiovisual tool to make a point with that prince of Egypt. Throw it on the ground, God said. And there's a kind of an odd semantic rhyming, as Jonathan Alter puts it, in the use of that same violent verb, shalach. Pharaoh used it when he commanded every Hebrew boy should be thrown into the Nile River. And when Moses threw it down, it became a snake, a nakash. Same word used in the story of the fall in the Garden of Eden earlier in the Bible, Genesis 3. Why a snake? Perhaps it was because snakes are yucky and nobody likes them, right? One of you may like a snake, but if you do it, don't even come to my house with it. I'm just telling you. We don't like snakes. Maybe because it was a sign of Egyptian royal authority. Remember, the Pharaoh's headdress had this image of a cobra worked into it. Maybe it was because turning a stick into a snake was a trick that was not known just to the Egyptians, but to the Hebrews as well. Moses, no doubt, was startled by it, but to his credit, when God said, now reach out your hand and pick it up by the tail, which everybody knows is not the way you pick up a snake, right? That's just stupid. Moses did it. Snake turned back into a staff. Then, furthermore, the Hebrew text puts it, the Lord told Moses to put his hand inside his cloak, literally his beheketa, his bosom against his chest. When he took it out, it was turned white as snow. Some translations will say that it was leprous. It's probably not so much that case as it is instantly lost all of its pigmentation. It was blanched. Similar thing happened later on to Moses' big sister Miriam, by the way, when she tried to balk at God's direction, and to Elisha's servant Gehazi in 2 Kings 5 when he tried to cut a deal with Naaman the Syrian on the side. Fortunately for Moses, when he followed God's direction and put his hand back into his cloak, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. The Lord said, now, if they don't believe you or pay attention to the first sign, maybe they'll pay attention to the second sign. But then God went one step further. He told Moses, take some water out of the Nile, pour it on dry ground, and it would become blood. A bit of a preview, even a spoiler alert for the plagues that were to come. So you'd think that after the burning bush, after the staff turned into a snake, after his own skin losing its pigmentation, after turning the water of the Nile into blood, after answering all the questions, all the concerns, that Moses would then have said, okay, God, I get it. I'm your man. Put me in, coach. But what did he say instead? Look again at verse 10. Pardon me, Lord. Not Yahweh, by the way. Adonai. Excuse me, that's a particle of entreaty, always used with my Lord. Excuse your servant, O Lord. But I've never been eloquent, neither in the past, nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. Literally, I am no man of words, and nothing has changed in this little encounter we've been having here by the burning bush. I'm heavy-mouthed, literally, and heavy-tongued. Kabed, it means weighty. It's related to the word kabo, translated as glory. Glory is a weighty thing, as C.S. Lewis once observed. Now, again, I get this because as odd as it may sound for a preacher, and this has to be God's sense of humor, I've never been a man of words either. My mouth and my tongue haven't always worked. So if Moses had a real stuttering problem, which the Septuagint, that's the Greek translation of the Old Testament out of the Hebrew, seems to imply, well, I completely feel for the guy. It's not only disabling, embarrassing, it can be downright terrifying for your mouth to physically lock up, not be able to say a word that you know, or to find yourself stuck on a particular sound, unable to get past it. So you develop all kinds of coping mechanisms in your fluency toolbox. You learn how to substitute words, even if your sentence structures come out a little awkward sounding sometimes. Takes language planning. It does give you a pretty good vocabulary. Or you try to manually control your breathing so that you can ramp up to some words by using another word just before them. To ask someone with such a condition to be the public spokesperson for an entire nation going up against the most powerful person in the world, the Pharaoh, that doesn't seem fair at all, does it? Only here's the thing. I don't think Moses really had an actual speech impediment at all. I think his response, for example, might just as easily have been an indication that in all of his years away from Egypt, he had pretty much lost his command of the Egyptian language, maybe. Or similarly, if he had indeed learned diplomatic skills growing up in the court in the palace of Pharaoh, which is likely that perhaps 40 years of hanging around primarily with sheep had pretty much diminished those skills. He certainly would have had many opportunities to practice those gifts. Sheep are just not that smart, unless this is correct. And mom says that maybe we should just go around and go baa all day. Shh, kids, quiet now. Act stupid. Someone's looking at us. So let's give old Moses the benefit of the doubt. Say that he really was a bit tongue-tied, though there is no suggestion of that in any of his later conversations in the book of Exodus. But if so, God had an answer for that objection too. And it's one which I personally have had to come to some grips with. For the Lord said to Moses, "Who gave human beings their mouth?" That's not fair at all, is it? My mouth doesn't work, God. Who made your mouth, Moses? Who gives them sight, makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? So go and I will help you speak. Literally, I will be, YHWH, I will be with your mouth and will teach you what to say. So at this point, Moses' difficulties had all been addressed, removed by the assurances of God. But that only brought to light the secret reason in his heart, which had been there all along. He didn't want to do it. In his commentary on Exodus, Peter Enns has put it this way. He says, no matter what, signs or no signs, whether or not God promises to be with him, Moses does not want to go. He's still viewing his call in the light of his circumstances, but the point that Moses has yet to learn is that his circumstances are not the proper light in which to view his call. His earlier objections have been legitimate, and God met those objections head on, one by one. This last objective, however, is not based on some legitimate concern. Moses just doesn't want to do it. He is simply putting his foot down and saying no. Pardon your servant, Lord, Moses replied. Please send someone else. It's an even more awkward sentence in the original language. You translate it word for word, it comes out something like, oh, please, my Lord, send, pray by the hand of him you would send. Go ahead and send someone, Lord. Just don't make it me. You ever been there? Been asked to do something which you really didn't want to do? Go somewhere you didn't really want to go? Talk to someone you don't even like? Move out of your comfort zone and into a danger zone? I think on this Memorial Day weekend, the countless men and women who went to war even though they didn't want to, no doubt. They did it out of a sense of duty. Aside from some draft dodgers of my era growing up, they didn't say, please send someone else. They went themselves. My friend Bob Taylor is a Methodist pastor out in the Rocky Mountains. He's also an Army veteran. He wrote recently about being in Normandy, where the Allied invasion took place some 77 years ago this week. Among the soldiers in the 101st Airborne Division, there were two medics, Robert Wright and Kenneth Moore. They set up an aid station in the village church in the small town of Andeville-en-Plan. They used the pews of the church as hospital beds. You can still see some of the stains of blood on those wooden benches today. They gathered the wounded from both sides, using a handcart and a wheelbarrow they found, often exposing themselves to enemy fire in the process. On the evening of D-Day, they had 75 wounded personnel in that church, including an infant. And when the Allies were forced to pull out, they stayed with the wounded. A German officer soon arrived. He asked if they could tend to his wounded as well, and they said, yes, of course. The battle raged outside for 3 days, with the village changing hands several times, going back and forth. But all the while, Wright and Moore kept working on the wounded from both sides. Anybody was welcome. They just had to leave their weapons outside the church door. 2 Germans who had been up in the bell tower since before D-Day finally came down. They surrendered to Wright and Moore, who immediately put them to work. No break, no sleep for 3 days. Short on supplies, under constant fire. They just kept on working. And in the process, they saved 80 lives in the sanctuary of that little church. My friend Bob puts it, the pews that had been built for saving souls became the place where people broken by conflict and pain found salvation of their bodies as well. That's worth remembering, isn't it? The church is not a hotel for saints, as it's often been observed. It's a hospital for sinners, for broken people, no matter what side they're on. But none of that would have happened if Robert Wright and Kenneth Moore had said when they were summoned, no, please send someone else. And you and I, my friends, who's to say we're not facing a similar summons in our lives this morning? Now, I have no doubt but that we have some excellent excuses, just like Moses did. But in the end, like those 2 medics, Moses overcame his own objections, agreed to do what God had asked him to do. Indeed, what God had been preparing for him to do all of his life, even though he didn't know it. See, we should really notice one more thing about this passage. It's kind of abrupt, even anticlimactic. But the last thing God says to Moses in this encounter is, don't forget your staff, Moses. Take this staff in your hand so you can perform the signs with it. See, God wanted Moses to know that something so lowly and unimportant as a shepherd's staff could be used by God for the most amazing purposes of all, the central salvific act of the whole Old Testament. Something so lowly and unimportant as a shepherd's staff, and even the shepherd himself. With the staff, Moses again struck the water of the Nile, and the whole river turned to blood. With the staff, he stretched it out over the rivers and the canals and the ponds, and frogs came up on the land of Egypt. We're going to talk about that next week. I can't wait to tell you about one more night with the frogs. With the staff, he struck the dust, and it became gnats. With his staff, he stretched it toward the sky, and the Lord sent thunder and hail. He pointed it, and locusts came. He parted the Red Sea waters. And on the other side of that sea, when the Israelites had not water, Moses struck the rock at Horeb, right where he was at this time, when he first encountered the burning bush. And out of the rock gushed forth all they needed to drink, plenteous water. No wonder God told him, don't forget the staff, Moses. You're going to need it. So what do you have in your hand this morning? What do you have? Ordinary, usual, comfortable, personal, whatever it is, throw it down. Let God use it. Let him transform it into the conduit of his divine power. Forget the what ifs and the pardon me's. When the calling comes, as it did for Moses and for the millions whose lives we remember this weekend, laid down in the service of others. Don't ask God to send somebody else. Tell him instead, here I am, Lord. Send me.